The first time I actually saw a homeless person was when I was 18 years old. It was my freshman year in college. I was a little country boy from Mississippi and went to college in Washington, D.C. And my dorm was right next to a large thoroughfare, and I would wake up in the mornings to go to breakfast, and there would be just any number of homeless people around me. And I didn't know how to think about these people I was seeing, and in my own wisdom, I thought, these people are lazy. And I had all kinds of ideas about who they were. I was in high and noble thoughts about what they did wrong. And I don't remember what happened or how I began to talk to another student, but this student happened to be a Muslim. And I don't remember why he said it, but he said something that would change my life. He said, if you really want to know what's going on, if you really want to get a sense of the movement of God, you should probably spend some time talking to one of those people. And I took him at his word. Now, some of those people that I talked to just really needed help. They really were struggling and in hurt and pain and agony and needed help. But the truth of the matter is there were many of the people that I spoke to, some veterans and former teachers and from all walks, even some former students from the very school that I was attending, brought wisdom to my life. And I didn't have words for it, but when I read what Paul says about God's foolishness, it occurred to me that someone from the outside looking in could say, it's ridiculous to talk to those people. What do you think you could learn from those? It's foolish. It doesn't make sense. And I want us to hold that in our minds, because if you look around the world to survey religion, and its place and influence in the world, looking at its power and the number of its adherents scattered around the world, I think it would be fair to conclude that Christianity is a great success. Christianity has triumphed. Now, that by no means suggests that there are no poor or persecuted or martyred Christians suffering under oppression and persecution from other people. It is, however, to assert that if one knew nothing about the origins of this faith, judged by the standards of the world's wisdom, it would be shocking to discover that the one in whose name we gather was a convicted criminal who was executed using one of the most shocking and degrading punishments that the Roman regime had at its disposal: crucifixion on a cross. That a faith that can now boast in its claim of wealth, of popes, of presidents, of empires, of grand cathedrals and grand temples, traces its theological foundation to death on a cross. Ooh, you all are so quiet. I thought I said something there, but that's all right. But if you think about it, if this religion, this faith, now as it stands, is the religion of the empire, and it comes from a death on a cross of a peasant rabbi, then the question is this: how did Christianity become so respectable? how did this religion, which found God's revelation in an execution, become the religion of the empire? I want us to walk with that a little bit. Because if the world were judging what happened, I could see Caesar now on the throne saying, boy, what a bunch of foolish people you are. You are some fools. And yet, God revealed God's self decisively in this low and despised rabbi who hailed from a backwater town and region in Palestine in the first century. God manifested God's self within someone so low and so despised that his execution didn't even ring out through history, except through other low and despised people. This is some foolish business, y'all. This is ridiculous. This doesn't make sense at all. Because in the calculus of the world, where power and might are demonstrated by who is left standing, Jesus is a bona fide, unquestionable loser. He's a loser. In the wisdom of the world, whatever his aim may have been, that he got himself arrested and crucified and that Rome still stood, made clear that Jesus failed at his project. All right, if you think I'm just talking noise, let me put it this way. If your leader is dead, your membership is over. That's typically how it works. If the person who found you is hauled off, thrown in prison, and killed, the rest of us usually scatter. And yet, these people who follow this rabbi, these people who have no name, these people who are not seen and not known, are set apart. They are made a people. They bow their knees and they confess that he is Lord. These Jesus people worship a crucified criminal, and it doesn't make sense. It is the most foolish thing you've ever heard. And Paul himself, who knew the honor and glory of being one of the wisest people, one of the wisest learned leaders in the Jewish life. That man is at pains to remind the church folk that the cross, that death on a cross, is the means by which they are saved. That the cross is the means by which you are who you are. And even as he had to tell them that, because guess what the church folk were doing? They were boasting about their own wisdom. They were boasting about their preferred religious leaders. They were boasting about how much spiritual gifts they had. Oh yeah, these were church folk, and you know the type. These were the church folk that said, I'm real faithful. I'm more faithful than you. You know those people, the one, I pray, I sing, I'm good, I'm going to heaven. Not you, though. And this is what the church in Corinth was doing. This is exactly what, I know Jesus. I'm ready to go. And they were interested in doing what they had learned from Rome. The whole imperial order of the Roman world was based on might and status and power. After all, they did kill Jesus and still had their empire. The cultural currency in Rome and by extension in Corinth was honor and status achieved by patronage, or even if you were born of noble birth. And so the church folk were bringing that kind of behavior right into the church. Right into the church. And even as they were claiming Jesus, they did not lose their desire to be seen, to be known, to be respected. They wanted to matter. So they began to claim currency of honor and status to celebrate themselves. They wanted to be important. And so they would hold on to anything that will give them an advantage over their neighbor. But they did not become a people. Paul wanted to remind them. They did not become a people. They did not become the fellowship of Jesus through power and through celebrating honor and status. That's not how they came to be. They did not come to be sanctified saints, called and enriched with gifts from God because of any power, because of any patronage, because someone gave it to them, someone they can honor, some connection or some kind of contact with people in the empire. They became a people because Jesus died on a cross. That's how they came to be. And so if there's going to be any boasting, you should be boasting in the cross. But guess what? It's foolish. It doesn't make sense. The cross is a shameful thing. The cross is a horrible thing. And you're telling us, Paul, to boast in a cross. But see, therein lies the proof that it doesn't mean anything to boast in triumph about our human achievements or about the way the world does things. The people in Corinth, no matter who they are, no matter where they've been, no matter what their status, no matter how they were born, no matter where they were born, the people in Corinth, the people in that church are a revelation of God. They themselves are who and what God is all about. They themselves are formed out of something so shameful because they themselves are God's way of showing up in the world. You see, they are some of the most marginal people in the world. They are not especially wise. They don't possess any power. They weren't born well. They have no status. Many of the people in that very church were enslaved, and some still are. And Paul testifies to them that God did not move first among those of noble birth. God did not move first in the palaces of Caesar or among the great philosophers of the age. God chose what is foolish to shame the wise. God chose what is weak to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised, things that are nothing, to reduce things that are to nothing. That is how God works. And so and all they need to do is look around. It was not through the mastery of rhetoric or the grand claims of philosophy or the plans and designs of some great designer that the gospel spread. It wasn't through military or political prowess that the Jesus people grew and became church. It was not through the plans and prerogatives of anybody who thought, let me design a system of religion. No. It was the revolutionary wisdom and power of God that made them so. It was God demonstrating God's foolishness, that God's foolishness is wiser than human wisdom. And God's weakness is stronger than any strength that we can ever muster. That's how God works. And that's what they should be boasting about. And here's the thing, let me tell you something. By acting in the cross, here's another thing. God then does something that nobody else could do. Nobody can lay claim to. Through a cross, God effects righteousness, sanctification, and redemption for all people. Even, by the way, us sitting right here right now. That's so foolish. My goodness. It doesn't make a lick of sense. It's so ridiculous that it has to be just the greatest feat that we could possibly imagine. Who could imagine this? That's what always gets me up in the morning, shouting, because in anything that I may even have grasp of, even my respect for the creators of Game of Thrones and Star Trek Discovery, no imagination can come up with this because it's foolish. And all of us get to enjoy. Oh, see, I'm about to jump down out of here and start dancing because it doesn't make any sense. And I get to be a part of it. And perhaps that's why I find it difficult to boast in the wealth, popes and presidents and empires and grand cathedrals to which Christianity can lay claim. Perhaps that's why I get concerned when the contemporary church is known more for its power and influence in the halls of government and commerce rather than its power to overturn the world's wisdom by loving our enemies and taking care of God's people, of doing justice and walking humbly. When we see ourselves in the news, how often are they talking about how we Christians are doing justice and walking humbly? Oh, see, that's what gets me nervous. When we boast in our power and privilege, as opposed to boasting in what God is doing in and among the least of these. I get it, I do. Trust me, I understand. We want to be respected. We do. We want to be successful. We want to be honorable. We want to be seen. Yes, we do. We want to take our place next to the other big institutions of the world. I don't think it's not an irony, it's not an accident that it was after Constantine, the great emperor, became a Christian that our priests started wearing long flowing robes that look like majesty. Oh, don't get me wrong, the queen in me loves a good robe. But I worry that I get it. We are concerned about our reputations, and we want to be relevant. You've heard them talk about the church being relevant. We want people to look to us. Oh, our culture tells us that what really matters is power and celebrity and respectability. Oh, I know. I'm on social media too, and our presence is judged and measured by likes, retweets, and followers. And we want to know that we are there. I get it. We've been conditioned to see that our worthiness is based upon how the rest of the world sees us. That's what was wrong with Corinth. But the cross is a reminder that we, no matter how unknown, unnamed, and unseen we may be by the world, no matter how many mistakes we have made, and we've made many of them, no matter what is going on in our life, no matter how many times we failed ourselves and failed our families, no matter what our identity is, what we call ourselves or no matter any of those things, we, all of us sitting here this morning, we are a revelation of God. I know you may have not been told that about yourself, but that is what we are. We are a manifestation of what God is doing in the world. Because you said, Pastor Nell, those are just words. Well, let me tell you how I know. I'll tell you how I know. Because if the world were setting the rules about who should experience God's gracious gifts of righteousness and sanctification and redemption, we wouldn't be included. If you call yourself LGBT or Q and the world was setting the rules about who God loves and chooses, we wouldn't be in the number. If the world were deciding, those of us who are in recovery, or those of us who are living with HIV, or those of us who are just poor, wouldn't be included. But that's how I know that God is doing some foolish stuff. Because when that testimony is given, we, all of us, no matter where we come from, no matter who you are, we are a revelation of what God did in that cross. So it doesn't matter what categories the world trades in. It doesn't matter how the world judges us. God has already judged and found us beloved. And it doesn't make any sense. It's foolish. But as I take my seat, remember, it's foolish. And God chose what is foolish to shame what is wise. God chose what is low and despised to reduce to nothing things that the world say is important. And that's how I know that we belong to a loving, gracious God. Oh, stay foolish. Amen.